training needs, as you're going through these priority list projects, what type of other activities can you do, even though it's just a punch list audit, that you need to be doing for larger properties? Can you go in and run blower door tests to start doing some of that training on these priority list properties so you're ready to scale later? And then think about your multifamily quality control process. How is that different from single family? What policy procedure do you have in place? And then what are those tools that you're helping your QCIs with in order to get their work done, whether that's a checklist or more guidance that takes that policy and procedure into actually functioning work. Making sure you get your subgrantees bought in is super important. Jason put together a multifamily weatherization guide to help ease that process and really help grantees work with subgrantees. It's just at a high level pathway. And that's available, I believe, on the NASCAS, will be available on the NASCAS portal. Jason's got 3 other resources as well to share, so he'll talk a little bit more about that. Create that policy procedure that's clear and transparent and facilitates multifamily work with your subgrantees rather than being a barrier. Make sure you're working with your subgrantees to develop that policy and procedure, and that it is something that facilitates multifamily instead of hurting it. And then once you get subgrantees that are doing the work, make sure you're providing that one-on-one support. Get out there and work with your subgrantees to give them the support that they need to answer their questions and solve their problems. And then identify, work with the subgrantees that are going to be most successful first. With identifying the subgrantees that are going to be good at multifamily, that's a challenge. Because if you start working with somebody that's not into it, that's going to make delivering those services more difficult. So one way to do this is providing training to the entire network, to your entire network, and then see who's interested in doing multifamily. Once you see who's interested, provide them with the other additional training that they'll need, whether that's auditor training or QCI training to do the multifamily units. And then start small, and think about scale. How do you turn that first multifamily unit into many and larger units? All right, and then a little bit more around buy-in here. The multifamily benefits, the broader multifamily benefits are certainly applicable to subgrantees. That lower ACPU, being able to spend more money more quickly, have a lot of IIJ money you need to spend, being able to spend that on these larger projects. And then the other thing that is kind of a hidden benefit is that property manager can act as a team member in dealing with clients and tenants and doing some of the work that subgrantees might otherwise do with single family members with approval and things like that. And then giving more thought to policies. What's the right owner contribution level, for example, that facilitates these projects without being a barrier? What's the tenant documentation process look like? How do you simplify that as much as possible so it's easy for the tenant, it's easy for the property manager, it's easy for the subgrantee? And then any type of QCI or auditor training, again, going back to policy procedures, guidance, those checklists that really facilitate easing multifamily into the workload and into the process flow for your subgrantees. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jason.
Welcome, everyone. Whoa, my voice is loud. I'm sorry about that.
Keep going.
I'll hold it like way out here. Testing. Oh, yeah, then that one will reverberate. Testing. I'm pretty loud. Is that good? Okay, so I do want to take a second. Again, I'm Jason Foy. I'm from Minnesota. I do want to thank my grantee who's in the room. I would not have been able to do multifamily weatherization without their assistance. They provided a lot of one-on-one support for my service provider and have been there holding us, talking with us, being in communication with us to make this possible. So thank you very much for your support and help. So we've got the roadmap and here it is today. So we're going to start with our agenda. So I'm going to talk about identifying projects, the easiest way to identify projects. We'll talk about HRAs, nonprofits, the HUD eligibility list. Then we're going to talk about open communication, how do we start opening communication with these private property owners, with these HRAs, with these nonprofits. It's really where the fun begins for me, because I can start having conversations with them. And the second thing we're gonna do, or the third thing we're gonna do, is talk about that initial site visit, how we can really bring value, right? How we can be confident, even though we've never done a multifamily before, we can still show confidence, and how we can provide more resources than just weatherization, which is extremely important. And then at the end, we'll identify if the project is viable and move forward with the approvals to get the work orders prepared for bid. Now I've got handouts along the way for each one of these topics because there's a lot to go into them, and they will be available for you on the website after the presentation sometime. So the first thing we want to do is identify properties. So you've got the HUD eligibility list. That's going to identify some properties for you. Get on there, you can look it up. Those are categorically eligible properties that you can start digging into. You can do property management websites. Your sub-grantees probably know the buildings in their area that are probably eligible. They can search the address of that property, probably find who's property managing it, and that's a point of contact you can use. Local HRAs and nonprofits also operate some of the HUD eligible properties, right?
What are HRAs?
Housing redevelopment authorities.
Public housing?
Is it public? It can be.
I think that just is a term we don't have in New York State. So
Oh, you don't have, okay, so in Minnesota, we have HRAs, which are housing redevelopment authorities, and they're kind of based upon in the counties that we have, and then they operate some housing voucher programs for housing vouchers. So they have properties that they own and manage as well. And nonprofits, we've got nonprofits across Minnesota as well that own housing voucher-based properties that might be eligible. So once you've identified some of these properties or potential properties, what we're going to do next is start doing some calling and emailing to get a one-on-one, right? And I would say the nonprofits and the housing redevelopment authorities are going to be a little bit easier to engage. They're going to be used to grant funding, they're going to be used to approval processes, they're going to be a little bit easier to work with. The private owners is going to take a little bit more of a unique approach. And we're going to talk about kind of what private owners are looking at in their investment properties, kind of what they're considering and trying to get their viewpoint, so that way we can come at them with good information. Private property management has been kind of the biggest barrier that we've had to come across. You find somebody who's kind of focused on the large property management of a large complex. They're really focused on, making sure that the units are leased out, making sure that the operating income's high, making sure that the property's doing well, and they're kind of a barrier to the investor or whoever has the authority to control that property. And then I did make a handout for this, so it's got property owner talking points. Kind of goes through this at a high level, and even gives you like a little speech that you can use on the phone. So again, when we're contacting property owners, we can use all kinds of information to identify them. If I drive past a property, I might be able to look it up on the tax website to see who owns it. I can search addresses on Google and I can find who the property manager is. I can use that HUD eligibility list or LIHEAP application data to identify the owner. So what's important to do in your first conversations as you're really getting started to deploy multifamily, especially with the priority list, is you want to keep things simple, right? You're really focused on trying to get a one-on-one conversation with whoever's in charge. So if it's a nonprofit, it's probably the executive director of that nonprofit. If it's an HRA, Housing Redevelopment Authority, it's probably the board that operates that HRA. You're going to want to go in there with a meeting, give them a slight presentation on what weatherization is. What you want to do is provide a simple presentation. So what I did was I developed a slideshow, just showed what like attic insulation looks like in a house, what a bathroom ventilation looks like, simple weatherization measures to get some buy-in. And then what I like to do is always set the expectation in that meeting that the property may or may not be eligible after that site visit. I want to set an expectation that even after you do a site visit, it still may not be eligible depending upon what's going on with that property. Some best advice is keep it simple, right? Don't dive too deep into the weeds. If you're doing that first phone call, maybe something like, hey, my name is Jason Foy, I'm the Weatherization Director at Tri-County Community Action Partnership. I see your building's eligible for weatherization services, would you have time to meet one-on-one? They'll probably ask you a repeat question like, what's weatherization services? You might say, well, we're really focused on energy efficiency. We do attic insulation, wall insulation, we might replace refrigerator. It really depends on what's going on in the building. Not diving real deep into the weeds, because there's a lot of things that go on with weatherization, right? But if you do, so I made this mistake, and I'll give you a story. My first multifamily I went too deep into the weeds too quickly. We got into the building, we did the site visit, then the property manager's like, well, what can we all do for measures? I said, well, the utility company wants me to put solar on stuff. We could do heat pump water heaters, we could do heat pump heating and air conditioning units. We could do bath fans, XYZ, I gave him 7+ years of weatherization knowledge in one email. Not a good idea. So I got a response, and it was, I don't know how we're going to pay to maintain all that equipment. We're not interested in weatherization services. Then they ghosted me. They wouldn't talk to me anymore. So really keep it simple in those early stages, especially as you're getting started. You know, this is new for people. They've all got the stuff that they're doing, so we want to make weatherization simple. Simplify the process, and then as you're moving forward, build on each interaction. You know, that first conversation is just attic insulation and refrigerator. The next conversation is we do ventilation, right? Third conversation is maybe we feel it out, see if you're interested in solar, right? As we're doing that one-on-one meeting, and they're seeing pictures of the work being done, and now they've got buy-in. They've got you in the room. We're creating a relationship, right? And then I want you to understand some simple terms for multifamily owners, specifically to like investors, right? These are the people that are a little bit more unique to touch base on. So if you're dealing with an HRA, Housing Development Authority, or you're dealing with a nonprofit, they're going to understand grants, those types of systems. Private owners are going to be focused on their return on investment, their cash-on-cash returns, their net operating income, and their tenant turnover. It's their day-to-day, that's what they're focused on. Got to make sure that that property is producing enough resources so that they can keep refinancing it through the loan, through the bank to keep it operational. Otherwise, they risk losing it. Some other best practices with building owners that I found, and this is where we can really start tying the conversation in between the building owner and the tenant. So if we're sitting down with them in that one-on-one meeting, we've got our presentation, we finally got in the room with them, we're going to look at it, right? The property owners are really viewing these as leverage investments, right? They're trying to focus